when we were talking, she said, in the end, yes, we were talking about a simple butter cookie, but for us, it's more. If we had just the store, it wouldn't be enough. So for us, the canestreletto is more than a cookie. This cookie has, I think, helped revive this town.
I'm Wendy Holloway, and this is Flavor of Italy, sharing the very best of Italian food and wine, lifestyle, and culture. This is Wendy Holloway with Flavor of Italy, and I'm here again with the prolific and amazing cookbook author, Domenica Marchetti, on the occasion of her brand new cookbook that's just coming out now. And if you love Italian food and you have a sweet tooth, this is the book for you. And I was just saying to Domenica, there
I'm
it
holding
is.
it up because I know you being in Italy and me being in the US right now, you only have the digital copy. So I wanted to be sure that folks see it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was saying to Domenica just before I put us online that it was exactly 5 years ago today that we did another podcast episode together. And I can't remember exactly what the occasion was, but some other amazing thing for sure that Domenica was doing. So, yeah, we're going to talk about her cookbook, and it's all about cookies. And you have it's called Italian Cookies, as the cover showed. So you've written 10 cookbooks,
Nine.
nine
This is the
cookbooks.
ninth. Yeah.
Okay, this is the ninth. And so I want to talk all about that. I have a few questions for you because one of the books that you had written in 10 years ago had a cookie title, but in Italian, Ciao biscotti.
Yes, that was a little book I did for my previous publisher that they had solicited from me. They wanted just a little book on the twice baked cookies that we know as biscotti. The original ones are the cantucci from Prato, the hard little almond slices that are good
Right.
for dipping in vinsanto or coffee. And so that little book was a riff on that original recipe with lots of variations, like chocolate biscotti, biscotti with different nuts, dried fruit, different flavors, ginger, lemon, spice. One of my favorites from that book was a biscotto that was coconut dipped in chocolate. So very
Yeah.
untraditional, but really delicious. So that was my
Okay.
first
Yeah.
foray into writing about cookies. But this
Okay.
is a completely different book. This is a much more immersive,
It is.
traditional, book.
Yeah. So obviously you love sweets. I mean, even though you did that not so immersive one and this one is, but that's something that you love. And the recipes are incredible. So you said, I think in your foreword or somewhere, that you actually got in a car and you drove all around and researched and met people in different bakeries and baked goods suppliers. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's funny because I never considered myself a person with a sweet tooth. I think Ciao Biscotti was just a little diversion from the sort of books that I had written previously, which were all about Italian cooking and looking at Italian foods through an ingredient lens. My first book was on Italian soups and stews, and then I had The Glorious Pasta of Italy, The Glorious Vegetables of Italy. Prior to Italian cookies, my book before that was Preserving Italy, which was all about preserving traditions in Italian, preserving traditions in the kitchen. And then I did two books on home cooking for William Sonoma. One was Rustic Italian and the other was Everyday Italian. But
You also had the
oh,
big
Big Night
night,
In,
which
which
I
was a
love.
menu book, just like a casual entertaining.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, fun.
So, but I did not expect to be writing about a book about cookies. I grew up with cookies. I grew up with Italian cookies. My mother was from Chieti in Abruzzo. And so she would make pizzelle, or as they call them in Abruzzo, ferratelle. There are various names for them, but she would make the pretty round patterned pizzelle that I really liked. She would also make these fried nut-filled cookies that she called calzonelli. They're also called cajunite. They have different names, and they're specific to Abruzzo, Molise, the sort of central south area of Italy. And she used to make these wonderful hazelnut crescents. And so I grew up with really good cookies, and we had this tradition every year, my mom, my sister, and I, of baking cookies for Christmas. And when we were little, she would sit us at the kitchen table with nutcrackers and make us shell all the nuts that she needed for her Christmas baking. But then my sister and I got into baking ourselves as we grew older, and every year we would get the December issue of Gourmet Magazine, which was always about cookies, and we would choose which cookies we want. And so every year we had this changing plate of Christmas cookies. And as much as I loved these Christmas traditions, I didn't think of cookies as a subject for a book necessarily until a few years ago when I was in Genova. So I do these small group culinary tours, and I do several of them. I do a number of them in Liguria, in and around that part of northwestern Italy. And I had my first taste of a cookie called canestrelletto di toriglia, which is a butter cookie, a flower shaped butter cookie, very plain. But when I bit into that cookie, I just was transported. It had such a pure flavor, not flavored with vanilla or lemon or nuts or anything. It was just this pure butter, egg, sugar flavor. And the texture was so melt in your mouth, crumbly, tender. I just wanted to know more about this cookie. So I looked on the back of the package and saw that they were produced in Toriglia. And so I just got in my little rental car and drove up to Toriglia, which is in the inland, the entroterra beyond the hills of Genova. And I found out that this cookie dates to the 15th century. It has a long history. It was rediscovered by the town at a certain point, and they, a few decades ago, just decided to really promote the town using the Canestrelletto di Toriglia. So there are a handful of bakeries, maybe 8 bakeries or so, that now produce this cookie, some of which have been producing it for a very long time. And show you, that's the canestrelletto di Toriglia. And so they have a festa every year that celebrates this cookie, that draws in people from everywhere, from the region and beyond. And I just thought, that's such a wonderful story. And I started to hear about other stories. I started to hear about, my friend from Genova said, you need to go to Gavi, where they make very delicious soft amaretti. They're my husband's favorites, she told me. So I went there, and that sent me to Voltaggio, which is just about 10 miles down the road. And they have their own version of the amaretto. There's amaretti di Saronno. I found that there's this swath of northern Italy, from the Umbria all the way out to the Veneto, where what I call cookie towns, where they're
Yeah.
cookies associated with specific towns. And from that, I just thought, okay, there's something here. I had not seen anything written about this before. The thing was, it was not just the cookies, it was the stories associated with the cookies. And so I turned my gaze south and took my research south, and ended up going all over Italy in search of cookies and cookie stories. And that's how the book was born.
In fact, your dedication, you're reverting back to your experience with your mom and your sister cooking. You dedicate this book to your sister in memory of that Christmas cookie baking experience.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was, and it's very hard to articulate how special that was. We would stay up until about 2 or 3 in the morning, the week before Christmas, as soon as Christmas break started at our school. And for some reason, these baking marathons always coincided with a marathon on TV of Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire musical movies.
right.
And this was before VCRs or DVRs or anything. You had to watch these movies live. So we would dash back and forth from the kitchen to the family room. And every time there was a commercial break, we'd go back into the kitchen, mix up our dough, shape our cookies, put our cookies in the oven, whatever. And this would go on until 2 or 3 in the morning. And it was just insane. It was so much fun. So of course I have this abiding love for cookies and the act of baking because I associate it with those wonderful days in the kitchen of my
Well,
childhood.
yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people feel that way, that that whole holiday baking experience is something you do with maybe your children or your friends. Or I do a cookie baking thing with some friends in Rome. We've been doing it for years, and each year we have a different outfit and we all wear like the same thing. We're snowflakes or whatever, but that's another thing. Or with the grandchildren or whatever. So it's very much of something that sticks in your heart. And
Yeah.
so reverting back to the cookie that really got you going up there in Genova, which is this butter cookie. And okay, so two things. I want to
Yeah.
talk about that cookie itself, but then you have your different areas. You have north, central, south, and islands, is how you've grouped the cookies. And there's one really special story that goes with each of those areas. And if I'm not mistaken, this butter cookie maker is your northern story, correct?
Yes, it is. So this is the better picture that I want to give a shout out to the wonderful photographer Lauren Volo, who shot all of the cookies for the book. We worked in a studio in New York, and my husband and I brought up hundreds and hundreds of cookies that I had baked, and she photographed them all with a wonderful stylist named Maeve Sheridan. But yes, so this is so each chapter is accompanied by a story, and this one is about Paola Rosazza Battore, who runs with her mother and her family an alimentari in Toriglia. It's this lovely little grocery store, but they're known for their estrelletti di Toriglia. So if you go to their shop, you'll see on their display case just packages. There's a photo of it in the book somewhere. Just packages of canestrelletti di Toriglia that she makes. She has a little bakery, a little bakery kitchen across the street from the alimentari. So every morning very early she gets up and makes dough, and she takes dough out of the fridge from that she had made the previous day and cuts out and bakes cookies, and so they're always fresh. And she let me watch her bake. I went to observe her for a couple of mornings, and this alimentari has been in her family, I think, since the late 19th century, and they've been baking the cookies for for generations. And so this is her livelihood. This is what she does. This is what she and other bakers do. And she said at the end of this story about her, when we were talking, she said, in the end, yes, we are talking about a simple butter cookie, but for us, it's more. If we had just the store, it wouldn't be enough. So for us, the canestreletto is more than a cookie. This cookie has, I think, helped revive this town, and she understands that. And as you know, Wendy, there are so many towns in Italy, in my family's region of Abruzzo, but all over Italy, in the hills, in the mountains, that are struggling economically. People have left over the generations to seek work and employment elsewhere, either in the city, like in Abruzzo, where I am. A lot of people have gone toward the coast where there are more jobs, and the cities, Pescara, whatever.
Right, right.
So a lot of these towns have been emptied of their populations. And to have something like this cookie that brings a reason to be there and to stay there and to raise your family there is really something special.
Oh, it
So
is.
yeah, yeah. So that was that story. But yeah, there are stories peppered throughout the book, and every cookie has a story, as as I found out. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
more than recipes for sure.
So, but let's talk about that cookie because, all right, in the States, anyhow, and in the UK, a butter cookie is sort of a classic thing. What is it makes this one so special?
So that's a great question. And on some levels, it is just a butter cookie. It's basically a version of pasta frolla, which, as you know, is an all-purpose butter dough. Not always butter, but mostly butter. Sometimes it's lard or olive oil, but it's essentially a rich pastry. You can make crostata shells with it, tart shells. You can whip it up and pipe it and make beanie, so little piped butter cookies that you see in bakeries that I also have a
Mhm.
recipe for. But what really set this cookie apart for me was the fact that it had so few ingredients. Good butter. So up in the north, there's alpine butter, and or some bakers up there use French butter. Flour, so soft pastry flour, egg yolks, and sugar. That's the classic recipe. You can add either a little lemon zest, a little vanilla, a little rum, but the classic recipe is just those four ingredients, not even salt. I add a pinch of salt. I think in a lot of Italian baking, there's not always salt, but I like salt to round out the
Yeah,
flavors. So
it just does something magical,
it
let's
makes
say.
the other flavors stand out.
Yeah,
It just balances everything. So it's just those ingredients. But while I was observing Paola making a batch of dough, I realized what it came down to was the quality of the ingredients and then the technique. So in US, we're used to combining the sugar and the butter and mixing it until it's fluffy, then adding in the eggs and whatever
right.
flavoring, and then adding in the flour. But as I watched Paola, she started with the egg yolks and the sugar, and it's just the raw egg yolks. There are various other recipes about that use hard boiled egg yolks because they're drier and they make a drier, more crumbly cookie. But that's not the traditional way of tortilla. The traditional way of tortilla is the egg yolks and the sugar, and you mix it thoroughly in an electric mixer, because if you do
Yeah,
it by hand, it takes forever, until it's very fluffy and pale, and then you add in the butter a little at a time as though you were making like a buttercream. So
right.
it's very silky by the end of when you add the butter. And then you add the dry ingredients and you just mix it until it's incorporated so you don't overmix. And that is what contributes to that signature buttery, melt in your mouth, crumbly, tender texture of these cookies. And I think what makes them, that sets them apart from other butter cookies. So
Yeah,
it
that's
was
interesting. And it makes
um,
sense that how you mix things together, even when it's very few ingredients, can
it's
really make a
everything. Yeah.
difference. And the idea of doing the egg yolk and the sugar first, yeah, that's very different from our way of doing it,
Yes,
let's say.
exactly. And then the egg white does not go to waste. It's brushed on top of the cookies to give them that shine and brown them a little bit as they're baking in the oven. But I will say that I am not a professional chef. I did not go to pastry school or even culinary school. My graduate degree is in journalism. I went to Columbia for journalism, and I used my journalism skills in this book. It was really about just a culinary exploration,
Right.
and I think that's why it was so important to observe people working, to interview the bakers, to go to these towns where the cookies are made, to observe life in these places. And I think these little details come out when you use those reporters' skills. So that was one of the things that was very important for putting this book together, for assembling it all, and for getting it right. People are very opinionated about cookies, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I wanted to make sure that I got everything right. But yeah, it is down to technique for a lot of these cookies. So another good example is all of the amaretti cookies in the book. There are at least a half a dozen
Oh,
recipes
yeah.
for almond cookies made with ground almonds or almond flour. And so many of them are basically just three ingredients: sugar, ground almonds, and egg whites. So you would think, well, what can you do with that? But depending on the ratio of ingredients, how you mix them together, how you shape them, whether you pipe them or roll them into balls or S's or however, and then how you bake them, for how long, what temperature. I mean, all of these factors make a difference in the final product. And so that was really a revelation to me, that how so few ingredients can yield so many different diverse regional results.
Absolutely. So, mentioning the almonds in general, you have three groups of what you consider to be the basic Italian cookie flour. So there's the pasta frolla kind and olive oil dough, which I don't think in the United States people do much, maybe starting a little bit. And then the almond based dough. I mean, there are some other kinds of doughs that people use, but in your research, you saw that, especially nut wise, that almond is a biggie.
Yes, I mean, almonds were introduced to Italy many, many centuries ago. I think maybe even as far back as the Phoenicians, and it was the Arabs who brought them to Sicily, who brought sugar to Sicily. And if you go to
Right.
Sicily and Sardinia and the islands, all of their confections, almost all of their confections are about almonds and sugar. They're all either marzipan or almond paste or ground almond base. So they turn out beautiful little marzipan fruits and confection, but it's all about the almonds. There are also almonds up in the north because they also grow there, and they grow
Right.
in many parts of Italy. But so one reason I wanted to organize the book regionally is because the ingredients are also regional. Like all of Italian cooking, it comes down to what grows there. So in Piemonte, we see hazelnuts and we see the baci di dama, which you could make either with almonds or hazelnuts. I chose hazelnuts in the book because I just love hazelnuts. And then sort of towards central Italy, you see walnuts introduced. And then in the south, in Sicily, you see pistachios, but overwhelmingly almonds. Olive oil, you mentioned olive oil in the dough. The farther south you get, the more you see olive oil introduced into the dough. Also, lard. There are recipes in Campania, and one of my favorite frolla cookies is from Sardinia, and it's there. It's called the. See if I can find it. It too is a lovely buttery cookie, ciambelline sarde, but it's made with
Mm.
lard instead of butter.
Well,
They have
actually,
that
lard
same
is
texture.
a wonderful ingredient in so many ways. And I think people in cooking, cookies and otherwise, sort of steer away from it, but it's to be embraced a lot of times.
It really gives cookies an incredibly rich, crumbly texture. Also, a kind of an underlay of flavor. If you use very high quality pig pork fat, leaf lard, which is the fat around the kidneys, it's very pure, clean flavor, but it does have a richness from a little bit of an undertone, and that comes out in the cookies. It's almost like a little savory quality that it has. And yeah, that's one of my favorite cookies in the book because it's so unique.
And then you allude to your love as a kid of fig Newtons, which I was crazy about. Now, here on my property, which eventually you'll see, we have a lot of fig trees, and I've I haven't tried to make fig Newtons per se, nor settembrini actually, and you use different jams. I think you have
Yeah.
one even where you have like a chocolate jam in it,
Oh,
or
yeah.
that's
So
another, yeah.
that's a
But
chocolate and fig jam. If you've never put chocolate in your fig jam, I highly recommend it. So that jam has, and there's a recipe. So the back of the book has a chapter called Basics and Embellishments, and that's where you get recipes. So this has cognac and chocolate in the fig jam,
right, yeah,
and
yeah,
it's
that's the picture.
really good. Yeah.
But I had thought I have to make fig Newtons every year. I say that, and I think I'm pick the figs off the tree and dry them to make them. But I suppose just making a fig jam, but really very thick, you
Hmm.
could achieve fig Newton style filling.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could. I've not made fig Newtons, so I can't really say exactly how to
Yeah.
make those. But for the settembrini, I used jam, and I suppose you could cook it down until it's thickened, or you can make jam with dried figs. There's actually a recipe in the book for a dried apricot jam because apricots here in the US especially I'm not finding the settembrini recipe, but apricots are hard to come by and they're very mealy. They tend not to be that
Um,
good. Yeah, and so I devised a jam that uses dried apricots and you reconstitute them. And you could do that with dried figs to make dried fig jam too. But the settembrini for that recipe, I call for either the fig and chocolate preserves with cognac or fig preserves with citrus zest or store-bought fig jam. I
right.
mean, you can use store-bought if you want, or fig paste. There's so that
Sure.
the condiment that people put out with cheese. So there are different ways you could go about it. I think settembrini maybe are the closest to fig Newtons, but essentially even a fig Newton is basically just pasta frolla, like a basic dough wrapped
Right.
around that fig filling.
Yeah. So back to the olive oil dough. Now in Puglia, at a place we often go and stay, the first time I had their olive oil cookies, I thought they were butter cookies. Description wise, it sounds like your Genovese cookie. But then they said, no, they make them with olive oil. And I've asked them a million times. Even last week, I called them and said, no, mine just don't come out that friabile, buttery that theirs do. So, but you have olive oil as like one of the main doughs. Are your olive oil cookies? Is there something special you do to make them friabile and
I'm going to look now because I have a number of olive oil doughs. This one I really like. This is a so one of my favorite categories of cookies is the biscotti da inzuppo, which is cookies meant for dunking in
coffee?
morning
Yeah,
cappuccino or milk if you're a kid, or caffè latte,
yeah.
or even, I mean, with the Cantucci and other ones, you can dip them in vin santo, but this is an extra virgin olive oil dough, and it's like a pasta frolla, and it's not quite as friabile as the canestrelletti, but it's definitely got a richness to it, even though it's an olive oil dough. Then I've got this is a biscotti. These are spiced red wine
Oh
cookies.
yeah. Uh-huh.
And these also call for olive oil, and these are crumblier and drier, perfect for dunking in coffee or wine. And the texture really depends, I think, on the other ingredients, how much flour. Let's see, is this an olive oil dough? No, so you can see how tender that dough is. That's a lard dough.
Yeah. Yummy.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it may be a little more challenging. Here's another olive oil dough. These are like the ciambelline vino. These are intorchiate, and these are from Puglia, I think. Yeah. So and that one is just it kind of breaks apart in your mouth. It's tender, but it's still very crunchy and crumbly. I think it depends on what kind of leavening you have, how much leavening. I mean, I have wine cookies that have no leavening at all. They're very rustic. I write a weekly newsletter called Buona Domenica, and I just shared that recipe in this week's newsletter
Oh, I'll have
on
to.
Substack. Yeah,
Yeah.
and but
Mhm.
that's a little bit different from these intorchiata, which call for a little bit of baking powder. If you use baking soda, that makes them a little crispier. So there are these nuances. So the place in Puglia that you're talking about, have they ever volunteered to share their recipe with you? Because it sounds great.
Not really. They're a little bit
I get it.
hedging.
I totally get it.
And the
Yeah,
proprietario of this place is very kind of geloso of everything. Now, I think the ladies, when I can get myself close to the kitchen and talk to them, they would be more generous about sharing. And
I always feel a little bit tentative about asking people for recipes, although several did. I had quite a few that did share recipes, that volunteered to share recipes, or that said yes if I asked them. But I always am very respectful about that because for a lot of these bakers, this is their livelihood. One of my favorite bakers is a baker from Scanno in Abruzzo, and
Mhm.
he's got a very small biscottificio, but you can just smell it as you're walking down the street, the smell of anise and
Right.
just that golden brown, something just coming right out of the oven, the sweetness, the sugar, the zest. And
Yeah.
he makes very rustic cookies. And he, from the first time I met him, like more than a decade ago, we've been going there for a long time, my family and I. He said he never shares his recipes because he said, and he doesn't send them, like he doesn't ship online. He doesn't have an online store. He said, if you want my cookies, you have to come to Scanno. We need people to come to Scanno. We
Right.
don't just
Yeah.
need tourists. We need people who appreciate what we do. He said, this is my livelihood. This is going to be my children's livelihood. He's got three sons who,
Right.
at least one of them now, work with him in the bakery. And to me, that is so important to respect what these people do and to share what they do in a non-intrusive way or in a way that doesn't appropriate their livelihood.
Yeah.
So I included a version of he's got these very big rustic amaretti cookies that I love, and I created my own recipe that I think approximates his, but he was one of the people I profiled because I would love for people to go find him in Scanno. His bakery is a
Sure.
gem. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's a great way to feature people like that. Well, everyone who's listening, this is a brand new book, and so you can order online.
Tomorrow is the
Oh,
release date. Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah. Well,
Fantastic. So,
so
yeah.
tomorrow being the 14th.
So the book will be available. So head to a bookstore or order online. It's a fabulous book, really wonderful recipes, and everyone enjoy. Domenica, thank you so much and
Thank
good
you,
luck with
Wendy.
this.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
thanks. This has been Flavor of Italy. Find us on www.flavorofitaly.com and on Substack, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, always as Flavor of Italy.